Welcome back. In this fourth video in our 10-video series on living the life you love, how to get free from anxiety, depression, and stress, we're going to be talking about how to debunk the myth. What myth am I talking about? The myth of your core fear. As we've said in earlier videos, each of us buys into a core fear in childhood, builds a chief defense, a primary way of protecting ourselves from that fear. And this is what builds our personality in ways that backfire, that cause our suffering. All of our problems can be traced down to the core fear, and our chief defense is what actually perpetuates the fear. So if we're going to try and get free of the fear, do the opposite of it, we have to first understand that it really is a myth. It's something we made up in childhood. There are two ways to do this. One is to go back to childhood, if possible, and remember what it was that gave rise to your core fear. Sometimes it's not possible because it might have happened at a pre-verbal time before we even have memory or language to put to it. In that case, no problem, because anytime we have a difficulty or a challenge or an upset, it's the core fear that we learned in childhood repeating itself now. So we want to see how the past is living on in the present. Any difficulty I have today, like fear of public speaking, or perhaps a depression about loss of a loved one, actually is interpreted by us through the lens of our core fear. And we're reliving that core fear now in ways that say this is how I should respond to the present day upset. So we can either look for the childhood source of it, or look at what the thoughts are in the back of our mind, which are repetitions of that childhood source. In the core fear exercise, which we learned in video 2, we were able to trace down the root fear underneath all the rest. And you may very well have experienced a sort of aha moment. That's where this comes from. Or flashbacks, remembering certain incidents that gave rise to your core fear. But it would be helpful at this point to make your best guess or go back to an earliest possible memory where you saw your core fear in action. It doesn't have to be the original source. It can be something from more recent times, but as early as possible so that we can see it in its pure form. Ask yourself what was going on at that time, or if you're working with the present day version, ask yourself again, what goes on today that stimulates that core fear and makes me say the world isn't safe in this particular way or that. Now, to debunk the myth, you want to start saying, these were the thoughts of a child. This is why it made sense at the time. This was the best I could do. And again, if you're not able to remember something from childhood, you say the same thing about something more recent. This was the best I could do given my present thought system. And here's why it's wrong. Here's why it doesn't make any sense. I don't have to constantly sacrifice myself to please other people and make sure that I'm not abandoned, because I'm not a child anymore. And if I'm abandoned, to use that example, I'm not going to die. I would have died as a child. I needed to have this fear then as a way to motivate myself to take action. But that's not true today. What other resources do I have for taking care of my needs? What if somebody were to reject me or disapprove of me in some way or other? What could I do that I wasn't able to do back then? Or that my thinking, my anxious thinking, won't let me think, or depressive thinking won't let me realize today? Come up with as detailed a list as possible of ways to debunk the myth of your core fear, why it's not true, and why you have other resources for being able to deal with your problems today than your chief defense. Now, I'm not expecting that this is going to all of a sudden dispel your fear or take away the depression. What it's designed to do is get you into the habit of getting insight into how this was in fact a myth, a fear that you made up in childhood, and something very worth facing so you can discover your freedom. In the next video, we're going to be working with our first real technique for facing fear and watching it dispel.